Welcome, everyone. I'm happy that you joined me for this course in Sensorimotor Psychotherapy. Sensorimotor Psychotherapy is a body-oriented talking therapy, as it's often described, to work through the body to heal the effects of trauma and relational wounds. So I'm really excited to be working with Quantum Way and presenting this course for you. We're going to cover a lot of topics. We'll learn how to draw on the body itself to stabilize physiological arousal. We'll learn how to work somatically to resolve the effects of trauma, to work with nonverbal trauma, as well as how to use the body to work with dissociative parts. And along the way, we'll be learning about the belief systems that are both trauma-related and attachment-related, and how they impact our bodies, our movement, our posture, our gesture. And then I want to end with how we can draw on our own bodies to build resilience, especially in these times, right, with all the stress of what's going on in the world. We can really learn to tap into the body itself to help us kind of widen our windows of tolerance and feel more empowered in the face of what's going on in the world. So let's start with why work with the body. I see the body as so intelligent. We will adapt automatically without any conscious thought to both traumatic events, as well as to our early attachment relationships, how we're treated by our peers and our families. And this includes not only our personal etiology, but also our social-cultural history. How oppression and marginalization, as well as positions of privilege, impact our bodies. One of the ways to think about psychotherapy is that there are really two narratives going on. One is the verbal narrative, which are the words, the story, what a client brings verbally, but the other is a somatic narrative. And the somatic narrative often tells a much more nuanced story that might not even be conscious. There might not be words to describe what the somatic narrative says. So we look at how physical patterns reflect both our personal and our sociocultural history. So these habits, they're designed to be adaptive and to maximize the resources that were available to us when traumatic events occurred or when relational hurts occurred. For example, if I grew up in a family where I'm expected to, not be seen, to hide myself, to not let myself out, my body might look very much like this, right? I might just pull in to support the message I'm getting from my environment. And a posture like that can also be very much trauma-related, like in an attempt to be invisible and not seen so that I don't get hurt, right? And we develop these patterns totally without words, totally without intent. And it's our body's ways of adapting to environmental and relational environment. In another example, if we're expected in our families to be tough, for example, and not to be weak, our bodies might have more of a posture like this, where we just give off this tough, don't mess with me kind of vibe. And that posture can also be in response to trauma, like in an attempt to appear strong and able to protect yourself so that maybe you won't get hurt, right? All those patterns are going to limit us in some way, right? If my posture is like this, it's going to be hard for me to drop down into my feelings, to feel vulnerable or really contactful, to open up. Um, the same if my posture is like this, right? Or if my posture is collapsed in a stance like this, it limits our experience. And the body will really carry our implicit memories, that which might not be and often isn't conscious. And I want to say something about the impact of oppression and the sociocultural context as well. Because we have to be aware that the way we live in our bodies is not only impacted by our personal ideology, but also by our culture and our social location. For example, one woman, young Asian woman I was working with, she had a little bit of that pulled in posture, and our first thought might be, oh, maybe she grew up in a family where she had to keep herself small somehow or not really show herself, right? As we worked together, what she reported was that her family really invited all of her. It was not a traumatizing environment. It was a very loving family, but culturally, she said, when I went out into the world, I was frightened, and I tried not to be seen because as an Asian woman in America, I didn't feel safe. So the physical stance was related to that marginalization. Yeah. So we look at the story the body is telling, okay, not only the verbal narrative. One of the ways to think of the somatic narrative, it's similar to the brain. Like people talk about the brain as being an anticipation machine. The main function of the brain is to predict what's going to happen next so that you can take adaptive action, right? So it's constantly predicting the future, anticipating what's going to happen next, and then making an action that responds to that prediction. It's very similar with the body, right? If you think about the somatic narrative, like if you think about a posture like this, right? That's just collapsed. When I do this, I almost feel kind of childlike. In fact, if you're willing, like do this with me. If you're just kind of collapsed, think about, what does this body expect? When I take on this posture, I certainly don't expect acceptance. I don't expect someone to say how great I'm doing. In relationship, I expect maybe dominance, maybe criticism, maybe abandonment. Yeah. Very different from an aligned, open posture. Like everything changes right away as soon as I come out of this into this, right? It's a whole new experience and a whole new expectation of the future. So the somatic narrative is continually anticipating the future, the relational future, the environmental future, and it reflects that implicit relational knowing, what we learned in relationships, right? What we can expect. And I want to emphasize that those patterns are very adaptive within that original environment, but when the environment changes, they tend to persist. This somatic narrative it'll communicate implicitly to others as well. So if you meet me on the street and my posture is open and upright like this, you're going to have a very different impression of me implicitly and a very different response than if my body's like this. You'll feel differently in yourself. You will have a different response in your own body if I am in a posture like this. Even my voice changes, right? Just by the posture. So this kind of nonverbal call and response and communication is going on continually, body to body, between ourselves and other people, between ourselves and the environment. But it also communicates to the self, right? There's research by Dijkstra, a woman named Dijkstra, I think Norwegian, who showed in her study that if you take on a certain posture, like if you take on a posture such as this, the memories of when that posture was operational are going to start to emerge, right? So like if I take on this posture, I can immediately, I feel a little bit like a child, like, oh, I don't want to show myself. What if I have the wrong answer? Some people live in their bodies like that continually. And you think of the message it gives to themselves as well as to the world. So we look at not only the message that's communicated to others, but also what are we telling ourselves just by how we live in our bodies? What's that posture and all the patterns that go along with it, communicating to ourselves every single moment?